They pounded on my door at dawn, two strangers in knockoff uniforms flashing fake badges and zip ties, claiming to be HOA police. Behind them, my neighbor Linda smirked like she'd already won. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'm not just another homeowner. I'm a federal prosecutor trained to dismantle organized scams. And this wasn't about lawn rules or noisy garages. This was a hostile takeover of an entire neighborhood, and I was about to expose it. When I first arrived at Cedar Grove, I thought I'd finally found the sanctuary I'd been searching for. After years of prosecuting white-collar criminals, drug lords, and crooked politicians, the idea of a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Maryland felt like the perfect escape. The rows of tidy brick houses, manicured lawns, and children riding bikes through tree-lined streets promised me a life that looked on the surface as far from courtroom battles as I could get. I wanted to believe that this cul-de-sac, with its neat gardens and polite waves from neighbors, was a place where I could breathe without constantly watching my back. But my peace didn't last long. Within the first week, I noticed something unsettling. Flyers started showing up in mailboxes, not the usual pizza, coupons, or community event announcements, but typed-up directives with bold lettering. All residents must comply with HOA inspection protocol. They weren't signed by any recognized board member. Instead, they bore the stamp of something called the HOA police unit. The language was aggressive, almost militaristic, and the rules were vague: no unauthorized activity, mandatory garage inspections, curfew patrol enforcement. None of it looked legitimate, and yet nobody seemed to question it openly. It wasn't until I met Linda that I realized where the source of this intimidation lay. She lived 2 houses down in a sprawling 2-story, with bright red shutters that looked out of place among the neutral tones of the block. Linda was the kind of woman who thrived on dominance. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a board meeting with a sharp bob haircut and a perpetual scowl, she carried herself as though she were mayor of the town. From the moment she introduced herself, there was a glint in her eye that told me she wasn't just another pushy neighbor, she saw herself as a ruler. On our first encounter, she knocked on my door holding a clipboard. "We have expectations here," she said flatly, looking me up and down, as though assessing whether I was worthy of living on her street. She pointed at my driveway. "Your car is fine, but you'll need to file the appropriate HOA form for overnight parking. And that paint on your shutters might not be up to standard." Her voice was syrupy, but with an edge that cut like glass. I smiled politely and asked, "Where can I find these forms? I haven't received any official HOA handbook." That's when she smirked. "Oh, I run most of the operations. I'll make sure you get what you need." I knew enough about communities like this to understand that there's usually a board, not one person calling the shots. Something about her certainty struck me as off, but I chose not to push back, at least not yet. In my line of work, I'd learned the importance of observing first, acting second. Over the next several days, small interactions with neighbors painted a clearer picture. People avoided Linda. They waved politely but stiffly, like prisoners wary of a guard. When I asked a man across the street if there was an HOA meeting schedule, he glanced nervously toward Linda's house before whispering, "We don't really have meetings anymore. She sort of handles things now." His tone suggested both resignation and fear. The breaking point came one night around midnight. I'd been reviewing case files from the office, sipping coffee on my porch, when I saw a pair of figures in dark uniforms walking down the street. They carried flashlights and wore jackets with bold white letters that read HOA Police. They peered into backyards, scribbled notes onto clipboards, and spoke in low voices. One of them shined a light at my garage door before jotting something down. I felt my pulse spike. I'd seen enough fake authority figures in my career to know what was happening. They weren't sanctioned law enforcement, just imposters with props meant to scare the average homeowner into compliance. And behind their operation, I could all but guarantee was Linda. The next morning, a typed notice was taped to my front door. It accused me of suspicious activity in my garage, demanded immediate inspection, and threatened fines for non-cooperation. The notice bore no seal, no official signature, just the same bold HOA police unit header. That was when my patience ended. I knocked on Linda's door, holding the paper in hand. She opened it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, care to explain this?" I asked, waving the notice. She tilted her head. "Rules are rules. Everyone has to follow them. We've had some incidents in the past, just ensuring safety. By sending people to skulk around my property at midnight, by fabricating citations," her lips curled into that smug smirk I was beginning to despise. "Maybe you're not used to living in a community. Here we take order seriously. If you have nothing to hide, then why object to a simple inspection? I leaned closer, lowering my voice. Because what you're doing is harassment. And because impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. For a flicker of a second, I saw something shift in her expression, uncertainty, maybe even fear. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms. You think you can scare me with big words? This isn't Washington Counselor. This is Cedar Grove. I set the standards here. I didn't reveal my role yet. I wasn't just a counselor. I was an assistant U.S. attorney with jurisdiction over federal fraud and impersonation crimes. If she thought she could bully me into silence, she was in for a shock. Later that week, my suspicions deepened. Several neighbors received similar bogus citations. One elderly couple told me they'd already paid a fine in cash because Linda convinced them it was required. Another woman confessed she was too afraid to speak up because Linda had threatened to report her violations to the county if she resisted. This wasn't a power trip anymore, it was extortion. What disturbed me most wasn't just Linda's audacity, but how effective her campaign was. People believed her because she acted with confidence and draped her authority in the trappings of officialdom: uniforms, badges, forms, patrols. It was a con as old as crime itself: act like you have power, and most people will submit without question. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to let this stand. I'd prosecuted schemes built on fake charities, shell corporations, even counterfeit universities, but never had I seen one planted right in my own neighborhood under the guise of a homeowners association. If Linda wanted a war, she had chosen the wrong opponent. Still, I knew I couldn't rush it. Taking her down would require evidence. I began documenting everything: flyers, bogus citations, late-night patrols. I snapped photos, recorded videos, and even started a file with timestamps of every suspicious incident. My training told me that sooner or later Linda would overreach, and when she did, I'd be ready to catch her. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly that moment would arrive. One cold Saturday morning, just as dawn broke, I was startled by a pounding on my door so hard that my windows rattled. I rushed to the entryway, still half asleep, my instincts screaming that this wasn't a friendly visit. Through the peephole, I saw them: two people in cheap-looking uniforms with HOA police plastered across their chests. Behind them, in the shadows of her porch light across the street, stood Linda, watching, waiting, smiling like a queen, about to witness a public execution. This was it. The opening move in a battle she thought she could win. The pounding on my front door grew louder, like they were determined to shake the frame right off its hinges. My first thought was that someone might be in danger, maybe a neighbor with an emergency. But as I steadied my breathing and peered through the peephole, my suspicion hardened into certainty. Standing on my porch were two figures dressed in dark, stiff uniforms that looked like they'd been bought in bulk off the internet. Across their chests in bright block letters were the words HOA Police. The taller one, a man with a square jaw and slicked back hair, gripped a clipboard like it was a weapon. His partner, a woman with sharp eyes and a permanent sneer, tapped a cheap-looking badge pinned to her chest as if daring me to challenge it. Behind them, leaning against the railing of her porch, was Linda. She didn't say a word, but her smug little grin said it. All this was her production, her theater, and I was her chosen target. I cracked the door open just an inch, enough to make my presence clear. "Can I help you?" The tall man wasted no time. He raised his chin and pointed at me with authority he didn't possess. "We're here on official HOA business. Your property has multiple violations. We'll need to inspect your garage immediately." My pulse quickened, but I forced a calm expression. "Violations. What exactly are you accusing me of?" The woman stepped forward, flashing her plastic badge. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We have authority from the Homeowners Association to perform inspections. Either comply or we'll escalate this." I studied their uniforms closely. The stitching was uneven, the patches slightly off-center, and the badges looked like something you'd pick up in a party store. But what struck me most was their boldness. They carried themselves as if they were untouchable, as if the very act of standing on my porch gave them legitimacy. Suppressing a laugh, I spoke evenly. "If you've got real authority, you'll show me a warrant signed by an actual judge. Otherwise, you're trespassing." The tall man smirked, leaning in closer. "Being FBI doesn't excuse you from neighborhood codes." That was the first time I felt a flicker of unease. They already knew who I was. My job, my background, it wasn't public knowledge in the neighborhood. The only way they could know was if Linda had been snooping, digging, and feeding them information. My eyes flicked to Linda, still standing on her porch, sipping from a mug as if she were watching a Saturday morning cartoon. When she noticed me looking, she gave a little wave with her free hand, then raised her eyebrows in mock innocence. I stepped out onto the porch, narrowing my gaze at her. "Linda, what's going on here? Why are you sending people to my door dressed like this?" She straightened her lips, curving into a smile too sweet to be genuine. "Oh, don't be dramatic. These officers are here to ensure community safety. Everyone has to follow the rules. You don't get special treatment just because of your job." Her voice carried just enough volume that I knew she wanted nearby neighbors to hear. She was building a narrative casting me as the arrogant outsider who thought he was above the law. The female officer crossed her arms and added, "We've had reports of suspicious activity in your garage late at night. We need to check it out now." I let out a short laugh, the kind that cut sharper than a shout. "Suspicious activity? What are you accusing me of? Stockpiling fireworks, hiding contraband, or maybe plotting to overthrow the HOA? Linda tilted her chin-up eyes, glittering with malice. "I heard noises. You could be storing hazardous materials, or worse. Why resist unless you have something to hide?" The male officer pulled out a sheet of paper, holding it out like it was scripture. "This is an official HOA investigation form. Failure to comply will be added to your list of violations." I glanced at the paper. It was laughable typed words on cheap printer stock, no seal, no signature, not even a letterhead worth believing. My jaw tightened. "That's not an official document. You two have no legal right to set foot inside my home." Linda sighed dramatically loud enough for the theatrics. "You sure you want to play it that way? Noncompliance only makes things worse." I folded my arms across my chest, every nerve in my body screaming to maintain control. "Since when does the HOA send out its own police force? Last I checked, community volunteers check lawns and paint colors." "That's it." The woman officer stepped closer, shoving her badge in my face. "We have new powers now. Step aside." I didn't budge. "Unless you come back with real law enforcement and a warrant signed by a judge, you're not entering this house." The tall man bristled, his hand tightening around a pair of plastic zip ties he'd produced from his belt. "Don't test us." I could feel the heat rising in my chest, anger threatening to boil over. But years in federal courtrooms had taught me patience, composure, and the power of words over fists. I leveled my voice low and cold. "If you try to enter, you'll be the ones facing charges, federal charges. Impersonating a law officer carries prison time. Do you understand me?" The woman officer's eyes flickered, but she didn't back down. She reached for a cheap-looking radio clipped to her shoulder, pretending to call for backup. I had no doubt the thing connected to nothing. Linda, ever the puppet master, clucked her tongue and shook her head. "Everybody on this street knows you think you're above the rules. But the HOA has eyes. We'll be watching." I took a step closer, lowering my tone so only the three of them could hear. "Then watch closely. Because the next move you make could land you in federal custody." For a moment there was silence. The zip ties dangled from the man's fist, the radio hovered in the woman's hand, and Linda's smile faltered ever so slightly. But then just as quickly they regrouped. The tall man sneered. "We'll give you one last warning." Linda nodded, raising her voice so the neighbors peeking from behind their curtains could hear. "He's refusing to comply. Mark it down. Another violation." And with that, they turned striding off my porch as though retreat were just another part of their act. The woman snapped a photo of me with her phone before stepping off the curb. Linda lingered, her eyes meeting mine, her lips curling into a parting shot. "Smile for the records." I closed the door with a slam, my hands shaking with restrained fury. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from my boss: "Get to the office now." The timing couldn't have been worse. I had no doubt in my mind this was connected, that Linda and her fake enforcers weren't just harassing me in the neighborhood, but feeding false reports that were already beginning to poison my reputation at work. As I grabbed my keys, I felt the weight of two battles pressing down on me. One in my neighborhood, where a power-hungry woman thought she could crown herself queen with fake cops and bogus laws, and another in the federal halls of justice, where my career now teetered on the edge because of her lies. And in that moment I realized Linda wasn't playing house with her HOA. She was staging a hostile takeover, and I was the only one standing in her way. The drive to my office should have taken 30 minutes, but it felt like hours. My mind replayed the confrontation in loops, the cheap uniforms, the zip ties flashing in my face, Linda smirking from her porch as though she'd orchestrated a masterpiece. My anger simmered, but so did unease. She wasn't just harassing me, she was staging a narrative, one carefully designed to corner me. And now my boss wanted me in the office immediately, which meant the fallout had already begun. When I pulled into the FBI field office, the parking lot was half empty, the early hour, leaving only the hardened early risers. As I stepped inside, I noticed the receptionist's wary glance. News traveled fast in government buildings, faster still when someone wanted it to. My shoes echoed against the polished floor as I approached my supervisor's door. He was standing there, arms crossed, face tight. "You took your sweet time," he muttered before waving me inside. The door shut, and the weight of the room pressed down on me. My boss, a man I respected for his integrity, tossed a manila folder across his desk. "You want to explain this?" I opened it. Inside were printed complaints allegedly from local authorities describing me as combative, uncooperative, even threatening. Words like hostile conduct and refusal to comply with lawful inspections screamed from the pages. I felt my stomach drop. "This is nonsense," I said firmly. "Those weren't authorities. They were impostors, hired muscle in fake uniforms." He rubbed his temples, clearly exhausted. "Maybe so. But I've got half a dozen reports sitting on my desk, signed by neighbors, and filed as official HOA documentation. Whether it's legitimate or not, the higher-ups see a pattern and you're at the center of it." My fists clenched. "Linda's behind this. She's created a fake HOA police force and is coercing people into signing whatever she wants. This is harassment, extortion even." He leaned back, studying me with a gaze I couldn't read. "I believe you, but belief won't matter if this escalates. If more reports come in, Internal Affairs will have no choice but to launch a review. And once that happens," he let the silence hang heavy. I forced a steady breath, willing myself to stay calm. I'd faced drug lords with armies of lawyers and mobsters with networks across states. But there was something more suffocating about this battle. Linda wasn't just targeting me at home, she was infiltrating my career, poisoning the very reputation I'd spent years building. Leaving his office, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a blocked number. The text read, "Better watch your step. We know who you are." My grip tightened until my knuckles went white. Whoever these imposters were, they had my number literally and figuratively. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, moving through motions at work, while whispers followed me down hallways. A few colleagues avoided eye contact. Others stared with quiet curiosity like they'd already heard rumors. The seed Linda planted was sprouting, and I knew how fast reputations could rot once whispers became fact. By the time I drove back to Cedar Grove, the sun was low, painting the neighborhood in dusky gold. As I turned onto my street, my heart sank. There at the corner was the same black SUV I'd glimpsed before, tinted windows reflecting the fading light. Its engine was silent, but the presence was loud. Intimidation, plain and simple. I parked in my driveway, forcing myself not to look rattled, but every step to my door felt like walking under a sniper's scope. Inside, I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and sat heavily on the couch. My phone dinged again. This time it was an email not from a blocked number, but from Internal Affairs. The subject line, "Incident Review Request." They wanted a written statement explaining my altercation with the HOA enforcement detail. Enforcement detail. They'd swallowed the bait. For a moment, despair gripped me. Linda had managed to blur the line between reality and fabrication so effectively that even federal channels were echoing her lies. My career, everything I'd built, was suddenly dangling on a thread. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every distant car door, every flicker of headlights across my window set my nerves on edge. Around 2:00 a.m., I jolted upright at the sound of footsteps outside. Peeking through the blinds, I saw a silhouette lingering by the curb. The figure stood for a long moment, staring at my house before slipping into the SUV and driving off. By morning, I felt hollow, running on caffeine and adrenaline. But I knew one thing with certainty: Linda was escalating, and I couldn't afford to stay passive. I needed evidence, and I needed allies. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, my neighbor Marissa showed up at my door, her hands trembling as she held a folded notice. "They left this on my porch," she whispered, thrusting it into my hands. The notice was nearly identical to the one I'd received, demanding payment for non-compliant paint colors and threatening eviction if unpaid. My jaw tightened as I read it. "Did you call the HOA about this?" She shook her head, eyes wide with fear. "The number doesn't work anymore. And when I tried to ask Linda, she told me if I didn't cooperate, they'd take me to court. I can't lose my home." My chest burned with anger. "This isn't real. These are scams. They have no legal authority to fine you or evict you." "But what if it is real?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What if she really can do it? Nobody's stopping her, and if I fight back, I'm alone." Her words cut deeper than she realized. That was Linda's weapon: fear. Fear of losing homes, fear of being ostracized, fear of standing alone. She had cultivated it masterfully, and now she wielded it like a sword. I put a hand on Marissa's shoulder. "You're not alone. I promise you. Don't pay them. Not a dime. I'll handle this. But as I watched her leave, shoulders slumped and eyes darting nervously, I felt the crushing weight of responsibility. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. If Linda could scare people like Marissa into compliance, then she already had a stranglehold on the neighborhood. That evening, as the sun dipped and shadows lengthened, I sat at my dining table surrounded by files. My legal instincts told me I had enough to start building a case fraud, impersonation, extortion. But my gut told me Linda wasn't done. She would push harder, and next time she wouldn't stop at threats. And as if to confirm my fear, my phone buzzed again. Another blocked message, this one more chilling than the rest. Cooperate or lose everything. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. This wasn't HOA drama anymore. This was war, and Linda had just declared it. The following morning, I walked into the bureau with a knot twisting in my gut. I'd handled investigations that spanned entire states, confronted crime syndicates with millions of dollars in backing, but never had I felt this vulnerable. Because this wasn't just about criminals on paper, it was personal. It was my street, my home, my reputation. And now it was leaking into the one place I thought was untouchable, my career. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, I could feel the change. Conversations hushed when I passed. 2 junior agents exchanged glances and muttered, pretending to study their case files. My name had traveled farther than I realized. The whispers Linda had planted were already germinating inside these walls. When I reached my boss's office, he was waiting with a folder so thick it looked like it belonged to a mafia case, not a neighborhood squabble. He slid it across the desk without a word. I opened it and felt my pulse pound in my ears. Inside were over a dozen incident reports filed under my name, accusations of threatening behavior, obstruction of community officers, even property damage during HOA inspections. My jaw dropped. Each page was signed by neighbors, people I'd barely exchanged more than a wave with. This is absurd, I said, my voice rough. These are fabricated. Those so-called officers aren't real, and Linda is coercing people into filing these. My boss's face was stone. I believe you, but I can't ignore paperwork, especially not when it arrives through official channels. Someone out there knows how to make this look legitimate. He tapped one of the forms with a pen. This report here, it doesn't just accuse you of refusing an inspection. It says you threatened to draw a weapon. I felt the heat rise in my chest. That's a lie. I never even touched a weapon. They were the ones who showed up at my door with zip ties. He leaned back in his chair, sighing heavily. I know, but you need to understand the situation. If Internal Affairs believes any of this, your career could be suspended pending review. We both know how slow that process is. And once a suspension hits, your reputation will never recover. The walls of his office seemed to close in. Years of work, years of putting away dangerous people, defending the law with everything I had at risk, because one woman decided to crown herself dictator of a suburban cul-de-sac. I clenched my fists on the desk. So what do you want me to do? Sit back while she dismantles my life? He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Get proof. Real proof. Catch her in the act, document everything. Until then, I can only shield you so much. My hands are tied. I left the office with fire in my veins. Proof, that was the key. But Linda wasn't stupid. She knew how to play this game. She had neighbors terrified, an entire fake enforcement squad, and somehow she'd wormed her way into the bureaucracy to plant reports that looked official. She wasn't just a meddling neighbor anymore, she was a strategist. When I drove home that evening, I passed Marissa's house and noticed a bright orange paper taped to her door. Another citation. My tires screeched as I pulled into my driveway. I stormed over and ripped it down, scanning the words. Final notice: non-compliance with HOA standards will result in forced eviction. Marissa opened the door, eyes red. They said if I don't pay by the end of the week, they'll take me to court. Court, I repeated, my voice sharp. These people don't have the authority to take anyone to court. This is intimidation, nothing more. She shook her head. But what if the judge believes them? They've got neighbors signing papers, giving statements. I can't risk losing everything. Her words hit me like a gut punch. That was Linda's genius. She didn't need real authority. All she needed was the illusion of it, wrapped in just enough paperwork and signatures to terrify people into compliance. And if she could make a federal prosecutor feel trapped, what chance did ordinary homeowners have? That night, I sat at my dining table with files scattered everywhere. Photos of bogus citations, screenshots of text threats, notes on patrol sightings. I even had video from my doorbell camera of the fake officers pounding on my door. It was something, but not enough. Linda had her claws in too deep. The more I studied the evidence, the more a chilling thought took root: she couldn't be doing this alone. The reports funneled into official channels, the neighbors too afraid to resist the phony security company with vehicles parked on my street. It all suggested she had backup. Someone in the shadows who knew how to manipulate systems. Just as the thought settled, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from another blocked number. "You're being watched. Stop digging, or you'll regret it." I slammed my fist against the table, sending papers flying. Enough was enough. I called Ramirez, a local officer I'd worked with on joint cases before. If anyone could cut through the red tape, it was him. Over the phone, I laid it all out. Linda's fake cops, the bogus citations, the intimidation tactics. He listened carefully, then exhaled. Sounds like classic impersonation and fraud. But I'll be honest, these cases are tricky. Without multiple neighbors willing to testify, it's your word against theirs. I've got one neighbor, Marissa. She's terrified, but I think she'll cooperate if she knows she has protection. "I'll run the plates on those SUVs," Ramirez said. "If they're tied to a private security firm without a license, that's your smoking gun. Just be careful. People like this don't bluff forever." When I hung up, I stared at the scattered files, the weight of it pressing down like a storm cloud. Linda had escalated beyond petty fines and paint complaints. She was hijacking an entire community, transforming fear into obedience, and wrapping it all in a web of pseudo-legitimacy. And if I didn't dismantle it soon, she wasn't just going to ruin me. She was going to own Cedar Grove. As midnight approached, I checked the window one last time. The SUV was still there, parked under the dim glow of a streetlight engine off windows tinted. Watching. Waiting. I whispered to myself, a vow as much as a warning. "You think you've trapped me, Linda, but you have no idea who you're dealing with." The following week, Cedar Grove no longer felt like a neighborhood, it felt like occupied territory. Everywhere I looked, I could see Linda's influence spreading like a disease. New signs appeared overnight on street corners, HOA police patrol keeping our community safe. They were cheaply laminated, but they looked official enough to fool the average homeowner. On Saturday morning, a flyer was slipped under every front door. It announced a mandatory safety contribution of $150 per household to cover uniform and patrol costs. It didn't say who to make the check out to, but the return address at the bottom was unmistakably Linda's. Some neighbors grumbled quietly, but most went along. Fear had them by the throat. They saw what happened to those who resisted public shaming, bogus violations, threats of eviction, and the intimidation wasn't just abstract anymore. The fake cops began patrolling in pairs, jotting down license plates, peering into garages, shining flashlights into windows after dark. Marissa came to me again 2 days later, clutching another notice. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "They left this on my porch. It says my dog's barking is a violation. They want $300 this time." I scanned the paper. Same bold lettering, same fabricated language, same fake seal. My blood boiled. They can't do this. It's extortion, plain and simple. Tears welled in her eyes. What am I supposed to do? My husband's already telling me to just pay. He doesn't want trouble. He says it's easier than fighting. I placed the notice on the table, forcing my voice to steady. "That's exactly what they want. Pay once and they'll keep coming back for more. You're not alone in this, Marissa. I'll stand with you." But I knew words weren't enough. Unless more neighbors stood up, Linda's little empire would tighten its grip until nobody dared breathe without her approval. That evening, as I walked down the block, I caught sight of another orange notice taped to an elderly couple's mailbox. Non-compliance with lawn maintenance standards, penalty $500. Their yard was perfectly manicured. The violation was pure fiction. The couple stood on their porch, staring at the paper with haunted expressions. I approached, but they shook their heads quickly, retreating inside before I could say a word. Fear once again had sealed their lips. The next morning, the whispers started. As I left my driveway, I heard 2 neighbors talking in hushed voices by their hedges. He's the one causing all this. If he just followed the rules, none of us would be dealing with this mess. I stopped in my tracks. "Excuse me," I asked, keeping my tone measured. They froze, eyes wide like children caught sneaking candy. One of them mumbled something about having to get to work before hurrying away. The other avoided my gaze entirely. Linda's propaganda was working. She wasn't just scaring them, she was turning them against me. It was a classic move: isolate the target, make him the scapegoat, and consolidate power through fear. I'd seen mob bosses and corrupt CEOs pull the same trick. Now I was watching it play out on a tree-lined suburban street. That night, I sat in my living room, surrounded by stacks of evidence. Every bogus citation, every flyer, every photo of the fake patrol cars. My laptop screen glowed with a timeline I'd started building, documenting each incident. If I wanted to bring Linda down, I needed an airtight case, something even the most skeptical federal judge couldn't ignore. But then a thought struck me. What if this wasn't just Linda? What if she had backing from someone bigger, someone outside Cedar Grove? The uniforms, the SUV, the professional-grade radios I'd seen on their belts. They weren't the kind of things you pick up at a garage sale. Someone had supplied her, and whoever it was had money. The next day, Ramirez called me back. I ran the plates, he said. The SUV belongs to a private security company based out of Delaware. On paper, they're legitimate. But here's the kicker. There's no record of them being contracted by Cedar Grove or any HOA in the county, which means they're operating illegally. Relief surged through me. That's the proof we need. Not quite, he cautioned. I can't take action unless homeowners are willing to file complaints. Otherwise, it's just my word against theirs. I need statements, witnesses, and right now nobody's stepping up. I thanked him and hung up, but frustration burned in my gut. Statements, witnesses. That was the missing piece, and Linda knew it. That's why she relied on fear, because as long as everyone stayed silent, she was untouchable. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Linda standing in hers, arms folded, watching me. She didn't look away when I met her gaze. Instead, she smirked and called out, "Careful, counselor. Word on the street is you're making enemies in high places." I clenched my jaw. "Intimidation won't work on me, Linda." Her smile widened. "Oh, it's not intimidation. It's reality. You think you're protecting this neighborhood, but all you're doing is putting everyone at risk. People don't want to fight. They want peace. And I give them that." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Peace through fear isn't peace. It's tyranny. And I won't let you get away with it." For the first time, I saw her mask slip just slightly. A flash of irritation crossed her face before she recovered. "You'd better be careful with your words. The HOA has eyes everywhere." With that, she turned and walked inside, leaving me standing in the twilight with the distinct sense that the battle lines had been drawn deeper than ever. Later that night, I found a flyer jammed under my windshield wiper. It read, "Community Meeting Mandatory Attendance. Agenda Addressing Rule, Violations and Safety Concerns." The meeting was to be held at the community center the following Friday. At the bottom, in bold, was a line that made my blood run cold. "Failure to attend will be recorded as non-compliance." Linda was tightening the noose, and for the first time I realized she wasn't just running a scam for money. She was building a regime. Friday arrived with a heaviness that pressed against my chest from the moment I woke. The so-called mandatory meeting loomed over the entire neighborhood like an execution notice. As I sipped bitter coffee, I glanced through the blinds and watched people shuffle to their cars, some carrying folded papers that looked eerily similar to the bogus citations Linda had been distributing. The tension on their faces was unmistakable. They weren't going to a community meeting, they were going to a trial. By late afternoon, Ramirez called me back with the results of his plate search. That SUV. It's registered to a firm called Guardian Shield Security, based out of Delaware. They're a real company on paper, but guess what? They don't hold an operating license in Maryland, and they sure as hell don't have a contract with your HOA. I gripped the phone tighter, so they're operating illegally. Exactly, but I still need more than that to act. If you can tie Linda to this company, proof of payments, contracts, emails, then I can bring charges. Right now, all I can prove is that Guardian Shield is out of bounds. You need the link that shows she's the one pulling the strings. After we hung up, I spread the documents I'd gathered across my dining table. Flyers, notices, photos of the fake officers patrolling. A pattern emerged as I laid them side by side. The fonts were identical, the language recycled, the formatting sloppy but consistent. They all screamed Linda's handiwork. And then buried at the bottom of one notice, I spotted something I hadn't noticed before. A tiny watermark with the initials, GSS, Guardian Shield Security. It wasn't ironclad, but it was a breadcrumb. I scanned the document and emailed it to Ramirez. His reply came quick. "That's a start. Keep digging. If you find anything financial, bring it straight to me." As the sun set, the community center began to fill. Cars lined the lot, neighbors filing in with tight shoulders and downcast eyes. I parked at the far edge, heart pounding, and slipped a small recording device into my jacket pocket. If Linda planned to make her biggest move tonight, I wanted every word on record. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, and nearly every seat was occupied. At the front, a makeshift podium had been set up. Beside it stood two of the fake HOA officers, arms crossed, radiating menace like nightclub bouncers. Their uniforms were cleaner tonight, pressed and polished as if Linda had upgraded their wardrobe for the occasion. And there she was, center stage. Linda wore a tailored navy blazer and pearls, exuding authority, like she'd been born into it. In her hands was a thick stack of papers. She greeted neighbors with warm smiles and polite nods, but her eyes glittered with triumph. She was in her element, commanding the room like a politician at a rally. I slipped into a seat near the back, keeping my head low. When the murmurs died down, Linda stepped to the podium and tapped the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this very important meeting. As you all know, our community has faced growing challenges, noise complaints, safety concerns, suspicious activities. That's why I took the initiative to establish the HOA police. To protect our homes, our families, our property values." A smattering of applause rose from a handful of neighbors, likely the ones too scared not to clap. Others sat frozen eyes, flicking nervously from Linda to the officers at her side. She continued, her voice dripping with righteousness. "Unfortunately, not everyone has been cooperative. Some individuals believe they are above the rules, that they can endanger the rest of us with their defiance. But I assure you, we have systems in place to ensure compliance. This is about safety, about order, about preserving the community we all love." Her words slithered through the room, feeding on fear. I felt my pulse climb. She was laying the groundwork to isolate me further, to paint me as the villain. I raised my hand and stood, my voice steady but firm. "That's a lie." Heads turned. The room went still. Linda's smile froze before curdling into a scowl. "Excuse me," I took a step forward. "Your so-called HOA police are not legitimate. They belong to a private security company operating illegally in this state. They have no authority to issue fines, citations, or threats. You're running a scam, Linda, and these people deserve to know the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the fake officers shifted his hand, brushing the zip ties on his belt, but I held up my badge. "Touch me, and you'll regret it. Federal prosecutor. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime, and I'll make sure every single one of you is held accountable." Linda recovered quickly, her voice rising in practiced outrage. "This man is twisting facts. Guardian Shield Security is a licensed firm hired to maintain order when our HOA board failed us. We're only trying to keep our neighborhood safe." I pulled my phone from my pocket and projected the scanned watermark onto the screen. "Then explain why your citations carry the Guardian Shield watermark, why their vehicles are parked outside my home at all hours, why you've silenced the official HOA hotline so that every complaint routes through you." A murmur swelled in the room. One neighbor, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, stood shakily. Is that true, Linda?" "You shut down the hotline," she faltered for the first time. "We streamlined communication." I pressed harder. "Streamlined. You hijacked it. You replaced legitimate processes with your own fake regime. You've been extorting your neighbors, threatening eviction, and pocketing the money." The crowd stirred louder now. A woman in the front row pulled out a citation from her purse. "This doesn't even have a signature. I paid you $400 for nothing." Linda's face flushed crimson. "That money went to community expenses." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Expenses that no one here can verify. Do you even have receipts, bank statements, contracts?" She slammed her stack of papers onto the podium. "Enough. You're trying to destroy everything we've built. But these people know the truth. They know I've been protecting them." I could see her slipping, her grip on the room unraveling. The recording device in my pocket captured every word, every contradiction. All I needed now was for one more thread to snap. And then, as if on cue, one of the fake officers muttered under his breath, loud enough for the front row to hear, "I didn't sign up for this scam." The crowd erupted. Neighbors surged forward, demanding to see the citations, to know where their money had gone. Some shouted, others snapped photos of the papers on the podium. Linda's voice rose above the din, shrill and desperate, but the spell was broken. I turned toward the door, heart racing, as Ramirez entered in uniform. His presence was electric, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He raised his voice above the chaos. "Everyone stay calm. We're opening an investigation into unauthorized security practices and possible fraud." The room went silent. All eyes fell on Linda, and for the first time her confidence cracked. The silence that followed Ramirez's announcement was heavy, almost suffocating. For the first time, the community's collective fear had shifted from me to Linda. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but the neighbors who once avoided my gaze now stared at her with suspicion and anger. Her carefully constructed empire was beginning to fracture. Linda lifted her chin, her voice shrill but still defiant. "This is harassment. Guardian Shield is a legitimate company. These so-called accusations are baseless. And who exactly are you, officer, to question our internal community structure?" Ramirez's expression didn't flicker. Cedar Grove never contracted Guardian Shield. There's no license for them to operate in Maryland. And I've got eyewitnesses who saw them impersonating law enforcement. He pulled out a notepad and held it up. This ends tonight. The fake officers stiffened beside the podium. One shifted uneasily, his eyes flicking toward the exit. Ramirez caught the movement. Don't even think about it, he barked. The authority in his tone left no room for argument. I seized the moment, stepping closer to the podium. Neighbors, listen to me. You've been threatened, extorted, and lied to. Those citations in your mailboxes, worthless. Those patrols in the dead of night, illegal. And every dollar you've paid has gone into Linda's pocket, not the community's. A woman in the front row, gray hair, trembling hands, stood clutching a citation. Her voice shook. I gave her $600 because she said my roof tiles weren't approved. That was my savings. Was that? Fake too, I met her gaze. Yes, completely fake. A ripple of outrage surged through the crowd. More neighbors pulled out papers, waving them like evidence in a courtroom. I paid $300 for my mailbox color, someone shouted. She said my fence was too tall, $250. Fine, another added. The air was charged raw, anger spilling out after months of bottled fear. Linda slammed her hands on the podium. You're all ungrateful. Without me, this neighborhood would fall into chaos. I gave you order. I gave you safety. Safety I cut in sharply, by stationing unlicensed thugs outside our homes, by silencing the real HOA and pretending to be the law. Ramirez stepped forward, his voice booming. Linda, you're under investigation for fraud, harassment, and impersonation of law enforcement. I suggest you cooperate. For the first time, panic flickered across her face, but she wasn't finished yet. With trembling hands, she pulled a sleek leather folder from beneath the podium and snapped it open. You want proof, she snapped. I have letters, endorsements, people in government who support what I'm doing. You think you can scare me with your badge. My family has influence you can't touch. She held up a typed letter with an official-looking seal. Gasps spread through the crowd. My stomach turned cold. She was playing her trump card. But I wasn't about to let her win. I strode forward, snatched the letter from her hand, and held it up for the crowd to see. This is a forgery. The seal isn't even embossed. It's printed. I tilted it so the light revealed the flat ink. You can buy this design online in less than 5 minutes. Another scam. Murmurs of disbelief spread through the room, but I saw the realization dawning on their faces. Linda wasn't a savior. She was a fraud, plain and simple. Linda's composure crumbled. Her face flushed red, her voice cracking as she shrieked, "Don't listen to him. He's the real threat here. He's the reason the FBI is watching us." That last sentence hit like a lightning bolt. Neighbors exchanged confused glances. Ramirez's brow furrowed, and I froze for a fraction of a second. She knew about my job. She'd just exposed me. The whispers began. FBI. He's FBI. Is that true? I raised my voice steady and unyielding. Yes. I'm a federal prosecutor. And that means I know exactly how serious Linda's crimes are. She isn't just bending HOA rules, she's committing federal offenses. Impersonation, wire fraud, extortion. And unless you all want to keep living under her threats, now is the time to speak up. The crowd erupted again, this time with courage. A middle-aged man stood. She made me sign a statement against you. Said if I didn't, she'd fine me for my shed. A woman followed. She told us you were dangerous, that you'd retaliate if we didn't obey her fake police. Ramirez scribbled furiously in his notepad, nodding. Witnesses were finally coming forward. The dam of silence had broken. Linda's knees buckled slightly. Her voice dropped to a hiss. You think you've won, but you don't understand. I have friends in high places. You won't survive this. I stepped closer, locking eyes with her. Then let's see if your friends can save you from federal prison. The room exploded with applause and shouts of support. Neighbors crowded around Ramirez, offering statements showing him citations demanding justice. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning. But even in that moment of victory, a shadow of doubt lingered. Linda wasn't the type to go down quietly, and if what she said about having connections was true, the battle might only be beginning. Ramirez placed a firm hand on her shoulder. Linda Garrett, you're coming with me for questioning. The fake officers hesitated, glancing at each other. For a moment, I thought they might intervene. But then one dropped his badge on the floor and muttered, "I'm done." He walked out, leaving Linda seething in her chair. The other followed soon after. Neighbors watched as Ramirez led Linda out of the room in cuffs. Some clapped. Others simply exhaled, like they were breathing freely for the first time in months. I stood there, the adrenaline still pumping through my veins, my badge heavy in my pocket. For tonight, the battle was won. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew the war wasn't over. Not if Linda had allies powerful enough to meddle in federal affairs. And sure enough, as the crowd dispersed and I stepped outside into the cool night air, my phone buzzed with a new message from a blocked number. "You may have stopped her, but you haven't stopped us." My breath caught. I stared at the glowing screen, the words etching themselves into my mind. Linda was gone for now, but her shadow still lingered. The message on my phone lingered in my mind like a warning bell that refused to stop ringing. "You may have stopped her, but you haven't stopped us." It was the kind of message meant to rattle you, to remind you that cutting off one head doesn't kill the serpent, it just makes room for another to grow. The morning after Linda's arrest, Cedar Grove looked different. Neighbors ventured outside for the first time in weeks without that haunted look in their eyes. Lawns were being trimmed, children biked freely down the cul-de-sac, and the heavy presence of HOA police patrols vanished overnight. But beneath the surface, the fear hadn't gone. I could see it in the way people still glanced over their shoulders, still whispered instead of speaking freely. Marissa knocked on my door later that day. She looked tired, but her voice carried a new steadiness. "She's really gone, for now," I said, nodding. "Ramirez has her in custody. There's enough evidence for charges: fraud, impersonation, harassment, and with the neighbors' statements, the case is strong." Marissa exhaled with visible relief, her shoulders dropping as if she'd been carrying a weight too heavy for too long. "I can't thank you enough. You saved us." I wanted to believe that, but my instincts told me otherwise. Linda wasn't a lone wolf. No suburban dictator builds a fake police force and a pipeline into federal complaint systems without help. Someone had been bankrolling her, guiding her, maybe even protecting her. That theory proved itself when I returned to the office Monday morning. My boss summoned me immediately, his expression unreadable. He closed the blinds and lowered his voice before speaking. "You've stirred something bigger than you realize. Word is Linda's uncle is Deputy Director Hale." My blood froze. Hale, one of the highest-ranking officials in the Bureau. A man with influence that stretched across multiple agencies. If Linda was his niece, that explained everything: the fast-tracked complaints, the silence from official HOA channels, the fear that kept neighbors compliant. I gritted my teeth. So she wasn't bluffing. "No," he said grimly. "And if Hale decides to shield her, this won't stop at community fraud charges. It could escalate into something much bigger, something political." For a moment, the room spun. I'd spent my career prosecuting criminals who thought they were untouchable. Now I was facing one who had family sitting near the top of the very agency I served. But I wasn't about to back down. Then we build the case so strong even Hale can't protect her. Financial records, contracts with Guardian Shield, proof of forgery, everything. My boss studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Careful, though. One wrong step and you're the one under review." Again, I left his office with fire in my veins. The community had seen Linda exposed, but the real war was just beginning. If Hale was pulling strings, then Guardian Shield wasn't just a rogue company. It was part of a larger network, one that profited off intimidation and fake authority. That night, as I drove home, I noticed something that made my stomach knot. Parked 2 blocks away, half hidden beneath a canopy of trees, was another black SUV. Not the same one I'd seen before. This one had different plates, different tinted glass. Watching, waiting. I pulled into my driveway, forced myself to act normal, but every step felt heavy. Inside, I checked the blinds, every nerve on edge. My phone buzzed again. Another block number. This time the message was shorter, sharper: "Stay quiet, or lose everything." I set the phone down, inhaled deeply, and whispered to myself, "Number, not this time," because Linda's downfall wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And if they wanted war, they'd chosen the wrong man to intimidate. This story isn't just about one woman's obsession with control, it's about how easily fear can spread when people stay silent. Linda didn't need real authority. She created the illusion of it, and her neighbors complied because they were too afraid to resist. That's a lesson for all of us. When we let intimidation dictate our choices, we give power to those who don't deserve it. In life, whether it's a toxic boss, an overbearing neighbor, or someone who thrives on manipulation, standing up for the truth is never easy. But silence only feeds their strength. Courage doesn't mean being fearless. It means acting even when fear is present. So ask yourself, what would you do if someone like Linda tried to control your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories about justice, resilience, and standing tall against bullies, make sure to subscribe, because there are more battles to uncover and more lessons to learn.